Hey everyone, Kate Bora and Fiona Pearman joining you for this week's Facebook Live, where we continue to talk about this year's International Women's Day theme, Count Her In. And today we want to dig into the gender pay gap. Now let's talk a little bit around why the gender pay gap matters. Firstly, it is an important measure of the earning capacity of men versus women, and the spending power that we have in the economy.
And I think what's really vital is it measures our progress. It spotlights the issues and it drives important conversations around solutions. It provides data from which we can work from.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, it's an interesting time here in Australia. The Workplace Gender Equality Agency has always asked organisations to submit their data, but this year they're actually releasing that data publicly. So it's going to be very interesting to see what that level of transparency drives. In terms of those conversations around solutions. We know anecdotally from our network, there was a little bit of nervousness, understandably, around that. I think importantly, the purpose and the rationale behind this next level of transparency is really to drive conversations, to really move and support organisations and encourage organisations to move towards solutions. I think importantly, what it's not designed to do is get into debates around how the gender pay gap is calculated. I've been part of, I've heard lots of conversations around how it's calculated, what are the numbers. I think importantly, when you step back, what we know, regardless of what percentage or what's the number today versus last week, versus last year, versus the year before, is we know that is remaining stubbornly high. The average woman will earn $1 million less than her male counterpart over the course of her career. Of course, if she has one child, she will earn $2 million less. So just that data, that stat on its own, tells us there is a gender pay gap.
And I think the opportunity here is to really understand what's going on beneath the surface. And I think what we've found is there's some really great reporting and ideas around this. The KPMG report done with Diversity Council and WGEA in 2022, She's Priced Less, really started to unpack 4 of the key drivers that are playing out and really influencing this whole conversation about gender pay equity. And the first stat that they're pulled on is gender discrimination. Look, this accounts for 36% of the gender pay gap, and it's really what would happen when we look at all of the variables, education, if everything was equal, what's going on and what's actually happening for men and women, and how is this showing up in terms of what they're being paid? And it includes things like the culture in organisations, the way in which we hire, our promotion, access to training. All of these things are part of that conversation about gender discrimination.
Yeah, I love this report. And lots of great reports out there to dig into. But I love this report because it really looks at the gender pay gap quite forensically and breaks down what are the drivers. With 36%, right, being the highest piece, this gender discrimination, which a lot of people make assumptions around that isn't an issue anymore. The second highest piece, 20%, relates to the impact of career breaks. Time out of the workforce, re-education, unemployment, things like that. Underemployment drives 20% of that gender pay gap.
Yeah, and I think there's a big component here, and we have to acknowledge, part of this is societal. There's an industrial segregation going on. This accounts for another 20%, but it's the fact that we have, and Australia is particularly high in this, very male-dominated and very female-dominated industries. We can immediately think of places where this is true, and we think about, education, healthcare, aged care. There are a lot more women than men working. When we think about, mining, some levels of, financial services and engineering, there's far more men. And so what's happened over time is those industries that are highly female dominated are actually on aggregate paid a lot less than the male dominated industries. And that factors into this overall gender pay gap as well.
Yeah, I think the final piece, the final piece that makes up collectively the top 4 account for 87%, right? Explain 87% of the gender pay gap. So a significant portion. The final piece is the volume of women, right? The work part-time, that accounts for 11% of that gap. We know here in Australia, the latest data shows us that 29% of women work part-time as compared to 10.8% of men. So that gap is an 18.9%, right, difference between the volume of women who work part-time and the volume of men who work part-time. Again, another significant gap and a key driver of the gender pay gap. I think what's important, particularly when we take what we take from this report, but also all the really great data that we have put out here in Australia on this, is there's lots of complex factors driving one number, right, that we report and that we talk about. And what's important is not necessarily the number, it's the conversations that are coming from across organisations now, across employees, and that organisations start to really co-create with their employees to address some of these challenges that we've been talking about. If it was easy to solve, it would have been solved decades ago. It's been consistently and stubbornly high for decades. And so really where we are now is we've got a great opportunity to really dig into and make some material changes on the gender pay gap and ultimately impact women's economic equality. So if you are digging into some of these conversations with your leaders across your organisation, with your people, you want some support around that to unpack where you're at, but importantly to implement some initiatives to drive changes around the conversations around discrimination, around workforce participation, then we'd love to talk with you. Our world, our expertise is very much working and supporting organisations and women specifically to get clear about what they want and really to step into their careers with confidence, to ask what they want, to negotiate those salaries and to challenge some of the status quos in organisations and industries where potentially they've been counting themselves out or counting themselves part-time because they don't feel that they can participate fully. So if that's you, we'd love to talk to you. Please reach out to us on our website, quantumimpactgroup.com.au or callconfidence.com.au.